The stars stretched far and wide across the dark expanse of Drathar space. The alien empire was vast, its military prowess unrivaled in the galaxy for centuries. Now every race they encountered had bent the knee or been wiped from existence. Their commanders sat high in their command centers, knowing they were the apex of everything they ruled, yet there was something they never expected: the tiny fleet that appeared on their scanners. At first, the Drathar dismissed it as a glitch, a brief flicker in the sensors, perhaps an anomaly or a malfunction in their tracking system. After all, there was no way that such a small group of ships could pose any threat to the might of their empire. But the fleet refused to disappear. It sat on the edge of their territory, barely a blip on the radar. They sent out long-range scans to determine the composition of the fleet, only to find that it was composed of only a handful of ships. The Drathar commanders snickered at the readings. They assumed the ships were either broken-down remnants of a failed expedition, or perhaps an ill-equipped scouting party from a minor species they had never heard of. Surely nothing that could ever rival their empire. The ships were small, crude in design, and the fleet appeared to be weak, just a handful of vessels scattered in space, drifting aimlessly. The Drathar laughed at the sight of such a pathetic force. One of the Drathar generals, a towering alien named Korlok, watched the display with disdain. He leaned back in his chair, his black eyes narrowing. As he watched the tiny ships move closer to the borders of their territory, he turned to his subordinates with a smirk. "What do you think this is?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Perhaps they want to send us a greeting or a message of surrender." His laughter filled the room. The idea of such a small, insignificant force even daring to approach their borders was laughable. The other commanders joined in the mockery, some suggesting that the fleet must be a trap, but none truly feared it. No, they were too confident, too secured in their power, their vast fleets and technological superiority, to even consider the possibility that the tiny ships represented anything more than an irritating inconvenience. Korlok flicked a hand in dismissal as he turned back to the display. "Let them come," he said with a smirk. "We will crush them like all the others before them. No one can stand against the might of the Drathar." His words echoed in the chamber, the atmosphere heavy with the arrogance of an empire that had never faced defeat. As the fleet of small ships drew closer still, the Drathar continued to mock them. They transmitted taunting messages to the approaching vessels, hoping to get a reaction. They joked about the insignificance of their fleet, warned them of the power they would soon face, and called them foolish for ever daring to enter Drathar space. But all they received in return was silence. And so the Drathar continued on their path, with no real concern for the small fleet approaching on the horizon. The arrogance that had built their empire now blinded them to the truth that would soon unfold, one they would never see coming, and one that would change the galaxy forever. The Drathar fleet readied itself for what they assumed would be a simple victory. The small human ships had entered their space without authorization and would quickly be crushed beneath the weight of their power. The alien warships loomed massive in comparison to the approaching human vessels, but the Drathar commanders took no precautions. They were too confident in their superiority to think that these tiny ships could pose any real danger. As the Drathar battle group advanced, the human fleet did not retreat as expected, nor did they hesitate. Instead, they moved with surprising coordination and precision, their ships weaving between asteroid fields and nebulas in ways that defied logic. The Drathar fleet adjusted its course to intercept, but the humans were already one step ahead. From the human side, the first contact came not in a barrage of firepower, but in a single, devastatingly accurate shot that tore through the shields of the lead Drathar vessel. With the force of a meteor strike, the Drathar ship groaned under the impact and staggered back in space. The commanders aboard the Drathar flagship were stunned. They had assumed that these human ships were nothing more than scrap metal, but the explosion that rippled from the human weapon was anything but. Korlok's eyes widened as the impact registered across his ship's sensors. The shockwaves reverberated through the fleet, and for the first time he felt something akin to uncertainty. The lead ship of the Drathar was momentarily crippled, its shield generators flickering, and the crew scrambling to assess the damage. "What was that?" Korlok muttered under his breath, staring at the now damaging human ships that remained eerily calm. Before the Drathar had a chance to react, the human struck again, this time not with a single shot, but with a series of precision strikes that shattered the Drathar fleet's formations. The small human ships darted between Drathar vessels with unnatural agility, their weapons firing in synchronized bursts that exploded into the hulls of the alien ships. The Drathar commanders had no time to process what was happening. They had expected a fight, yes, but not this relentless, surgical assault. They began to scramble their forces to form a defensive perimeter, but the humans were already inside their lines, striking with quick bursts of fire before retreating into the blackness of space again, like shadows moving too fast to catch. With every minute that passed, the Drathar fleet found itself losing ships to the relentless onslaught of these mysterious invaders. They tried to retaliate with their advanced weaponry, but the human ships seemed to have an uncanny ability to evade every shot fired their way. It was as if they were being led into every trap with perfect precision. Korlak ordered the fleet to concentrate fire on the lead human ship, hoping to bring down the enemy command vessel and break their morale. But the humans had already anticipated the move. Their ships scattered in every direction and began to fire at multiple targets. Each Drathar ship was now a potential threat, as the tiny human fleet proved to be more than a nuisance. The Drathar began to panic for the first time in generations. The alien empire was facing an adversary it could not easily conquer. Their confidence began to slip away as they saw their ships disappear into the void one after another, unable to stop the relentless tide of fire that was coming from the humans they had underestimated. Korlak clenched his fists in anger as he watched his fleet slowly being torn apart piece by piece. How is this possible? He growled, his voice filled with disbelief as his empire began to lose its grasp on the situation. The tiny human fleet that they had mocked was proving to be something far more dangerous than they ever could have imagined. The battle had turned into a relentless storm, with the once confident Drathar fleet scrambling to adjust to the unpredictability of the human attackers. What had begun as a mockable raid now felt like an all-out war against an enemy they couldn't even begin to understand. Drathar warships burned and crumpled under the concentrated fire of the human fleet, yet their attackers seemed to evade every attempt at retaliation with unnerving precision. Every shot from the humans seemed planned, every movement orchestrated, as if they were more than a mere few vessels. They were a force. Korlak's eyes darted between the holographic displays as the situation deteriorated further. "This cannot be happening," he muttered, disbelief coloring his voice. His fleet, once poised to crush these intruders, now appeared fragile, vulnerable to a group of ships, no larger than a speck in comparison to the Drathar Armada. The flagship's shields had been down for over a minute, now flickering like dying embers, and the internal damage was mounting. Desperation hung heavy in the air, and Korlak's orders came in rapid succession. "Concentrate firepower on the enemy's flagship. We can still break their morale." But as the Drathar ships poured all their fire into the lead human ship, it swiftly dodged, slipping between massive chunks of space debris, like a ghost slipping through fingers. The Drathar commander's frustration deepened. There was no pattern, no predictability to the human movements. It was as if they had been trained for this very moment. Something was wrong. Then it hit Korlak. The humans were using the very tactics they had been trained to avoid. Rather than confronting the Drathar head-on, they were exploiting every weakness in the Drathar's defensive strategies. They weren't engaging in a war of brute force. They were playing a different game, a game of positioning and timing, drawing the Drathar into a series of traps. It was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for dominance. The humans had anticipated everything. The smaller ships, once perceived as weak, were now acting like predators, circling their prey, never giving the Drathar a chance to regroup or find a foothold. Korlak's mind raced. The humans' fleet was no longer just a few scattered vessels. They had become an elusive shadow, slipping through the Drathar defenses with astonishing accuracy. Their attacks were coordinated, their tactics advanced, their weapons efficient, and the Drathar were just too slow to adjust. "What are they hiding?" Korlak barked. He'd watched the way the humans fought, the way they seemed to know the movements of every Drathar ship before they made them. The scattered, seemingly disorganized pattern of human fire was, in fact, a highly calculated and deliberate method of warfare, one designed to take full advantage of Drathar weaknesses. "Sir, we've intercepted a communication." One of his officers spoke urgently, bringing up a new transmission on the screen. The message was in a code unfamiliar to the Drathar, but there was something striking about the way the human ships responded. They weren't acting out of desperation. They were organizing. Reinforcements were arriving, pulling Drathar ships into ambushes at exactly the right moments. It was as if they had full knowledge of Drathar fleet movements ahead of time. It couldn't be chance. Korlok's face twisted with anger as the realization hit him. The humans hadn't just arrived by accident. They had been planning this from the start. They were not some ragtag group of survivors. They were a fleet with deep knowledge of Drathar tactics, weaknesses, and movements. They were organized, they were coordinated, and they had a technology the Drathar hadn't even dreamed of. This tiny fleet of human ships, what the Drathar had fought were nothing more than a nuisance, was a carefully constructed, highly efficient military machine. The realization sent a chill through Korlok's spine. They had underestimated the humans in ways unimaginable, and now, that mistake was unraveling his empire, piece by piece. They weren't the hunted. They were the hunters. "We've been blind," Korlok growled as he watched the incoming fire from yet another human ship cut through the hull of a nearby cruiser. "Send word to all sectors. We need reinforcements now. This fight is far from over." But deep down, Korlok knew it was too late. The humans were no longer the small, insignificant force they had once believed them to be. They were a true Armada, and they had only just begun. The tide of battle had shifted in ways that no Drathar general could have anticipated. What had begun as a simple operation to destroy a tiny, unworthy fleet had spiraled into an all-out struggle for survival. Every decision, every tactical choice the Drathar had made up until this point seemed to be falling apart. Korlok stood at the helm of his flagship, his hands gripping the controls with white knuckles, his mind racing as he watched his fleet's destruction unfold in real time. The human ships, no longer confined to their original positions, now spread out across the battlefield like a swarm of angry hornets, relentlessly picking apart Drathar warships. No longer were they simply evading fire. They were actively hunting, targeting weak points with pinpoint accuracy and exploiting every vulnerability in the Drathar fleet. It was as though the humans had studied every Drathar tactic, every defense protocol, and had found ways to turn them against their creators. Korlok's fists clenched. His fleet had been expected to obliterate the humans in mere minutes. Yet hours later, the human forces remained relentless, growing more confident with every victory. His fleet, once full of pride and arrogance, was now battered and disoriented, torn apart by the precision of these attackers. "Prepare for the next assault," Korlok barked through gritted teeth, trying to maintain what little control he could. "We'll regroup and hit them from all sides." But his words felt hollow. Every movement his ships made seemed to be anticipated. Whenever a Drathar warship attempted to reposition, it was immediately targeted and taken down by a fleet of humans who always seemed to know the exact spot to hit. Every attempt to reestablish order was met with counterattacks that were impossibly effective. The Drathar shields failed under the pressure, their systems collapsing one by one. As his officers scrambled to contain the damage, Korlok's mind raced. What was happening? This was no longer a battle between a mighty empire and a weak fleet. This was something different entirely. The humans weren't just reacting. They were in full control. It was as though they were orchestrating the entire battle, pushing the Drathar fleet into a series of devastating traps. "Sir," one of the officers said nervously, "we've identified a pattern in their attacks. They err." He paused, unsure whether he was even speaking the truth. "They are predicting our movements. It's as if they know everything we're going to do." Korlok's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, know everything?" "It's as if they've studied us, our weaknesses, our tactics, our strategies. Every time we make a move, They know exactly how to counter it before we even make it. A cold realization washed over Korlok. The humans weren't reacting by chance. They had intelligence on the Drathar fleet's every maneuver. His orders were no longer working, his strategies collapsing under the weight of their flawless execution. The human fleet had outmaneuvered them, outclassed them in every way. Worse still, the Drathar could no longer predict the humans' next move. Then, just as he was about to issue a retreat order, a new transmission crackled across the communication line. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't even a challenge. It was simply a message, clear, concise, and laced with an eerie calm. Your empire will fall. Korlok's blood turned to ice. This message wasn't an empty threat. It was a declaration of what was coming. The Drathar Empire had underestimated the humans, mocked them, dismissed them. And now, it was too late. Deploy all remaining forces, Korlok snapped, his voice heavy with growing dread. We fight to the last ship. But deep inside, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The humans weren't just a fleet. They were an idea. A force that could not be crushed, no matter the odds. The Drathar had come to their borders expecting to crush a pitiful little force, but now, as the battle raged on, they realized their mistake. They were facing not an enemy of ships, but an enemy of relentless willpower. And that, above all else, would be their undoing. The human fleet was no longer the target. The Drathar were. And the reckoning had only just begun. The Drathar fleet, once a symbol of dominance across the galaxy, was now a shattered remnant of its former self. The vast, imposing ships, once the envy of every species they had encountered, were now little more than debris floating in the void. The human fleet, though still small in number, had proven itself to be something far more terrifying than the Drathar could have ever imagined. Korlok, his once unshakable confidence now replaced by a gnawing dread, paced the command center of his flagship, his mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. Every Drathar officer in the room knew one thing: they had misjudged the humans. When the first human ships had appeared on the edges of Drathar space, they had been dismissed as insignificant, a nuisance at best. But now, as the Drathar fleet continued to crumble under the relentless precision of the human attackers, it became painfully clear that they had severely underestimated their adversaries. The humans weren't just skilled tacticians or lucky survivors. They were a well-organized, highly trained force. Korlok's suspicions grew stronger with each passing hour. This wasn't the first time the humans had fought. This was the culmination of years of preparation, a strategy honed through battles fought on different fronts across the galaxy. It was clear now. The humans had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The real shock, however, came when Korlok's intelligence officers brought him new, troubling information. "Sir, we've intercepted a message from the farthest reaches of human space," one officer reported, his voice trembling. "It's a coded transmission. We've never seen anything like it." Korlok turned to face him, his heart hammering in his chest. "What is it?" The officer hesitated for a moment, his hands shaking as he passed over the data. "It's not just one message, sir. It's a pattern. Multiple coordinates. A network of fleets spread out across human space, all mobilizing in synchrony. They are coordinating every move. These aren't isolated vessels. This is the beginning of something much larger." The weight of those words hit Korlok like a physical blow. The tiny fleet they had mocked was only a small fraction of a much larger human force, one that had been silently organizing, preparing for this moment. The realization dawned on him with terrifying clarity. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were waging a war. "What are they planning?" Korlok growled. His empire, which had once dominated the galaxy with ease, was now facing an enemy that had intelligence, foresight, and unity on an unimaginable scale. "It appears they've infiltrated our communications network, sir," the officer continued. "They know our battle tactics, our fleet movements, everything we've done to try and outmaneuver them. They've already anticipated it. They are one step ahead always." Korlok's mind raced as he tried to process the enormity of what this meant. The Drathar had thought they were invincible, a force beyond reproach. They had believed that their technology, their numbers, and their sheer firepower would be enough to crush the humans without effort. But the humans had proven them wrong. And now, as they looked down the barrel of an increasingly inevitable defeat, the truth was undeniable. The humans had not only survived, they had learned. And in that learning, they had become something far more dangerous than the Drathar could have imagined. "Sir," the officer continued, "there's more. It seems the humans are reaching out to other species, some we've never even encountered. They're forming alliances, treaties. We might not be facing just the humans anymore." A cold, nauseating realization gripped Korlok's heart. The Drathar Empire was collapsing, and it wasn't just because of a small human fleet. The humans were united, organized, and now they were gathering others to their cause. The Drathar commanders had thought the humans were weak, unimportant, a species that could be easily crushed. They had dismissed them as little more than prey. But the truth had become painfully clear. The humans were a force that could no longer be ignored. They had gone from underdogs to conquerors, and now they were rallying the galaxy to their side. The Drathar Empire, once untouchable, was on the brink of total collapse. The humans weren't just a threat anymore. They were a revolution in the making, and no amount of Drathar firepower could stop them. Korlok's voice was low, filled with a sense of foreboding. "Prepare the fleet. We may be able to hold them off for now, but we are fighting more than just humans. We are fighting the future." And in that moment, Korlok knew that the war had only just begun. The humans had risen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The battle had raged for days, and the Drathar were beginning to feel the weight of their growing losses. Their fleet, once a towering symbol of invincibility, was now a scattered shadow of its former might. Korlok's flagship had sustained heavy damage, and the once proud Drathar ships were now riddled with breaches and destroyed systems. His officers, once brimming with confidence, now spoke in hushed voices, their fear palpable. Despite the overwhelming odds, Korlok had refused to acknowledge defeat. His pride, his belief in the superiority of the Drathar, kept him fighting. But deep down, he knew the truth. This war was slipping from his grasp. The humans were not simply a fleeting threat, a nuisance that could be crushed. No, they were something far more dangerous. They were a revolution in the making, and their relentless advance was unstoppable. In the depths of his flagship, Korlok paced, his mind trying to process the enormity of what had transpired. He had underestimated them at every turn. What he had initially dismissed as a small, isolated fleet was now a well-coordinated, highly efficient force capable of dismantling an empire. The humans, it seemed, were playing a long game, and they had been preparing for this moment for years. They had built alliances, gained knowledge of Drathar tactics, and now they were systematically dismantling everything Korlok had fought for. But Korlok was not one to go down without a fight. His heart burned with the desire for revenge, and he would not allow the Drathar Empire to crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. He called for a meeting with his most trusted generals, hoping that some new plan might emerge from the chaos. As his officers assembled, Korlok wasted no time. "We have been blind," he began, his voice low and filled with frustration. "These humans are not mere invaders. They have been planning this for years, and they are now striking at our very heart. We have made a grave mistake in underestimating them." One of his generals, a battle-hardened officer named Varric, spoke up. "It's too late to change our strategy now. They know everything we will do before we do it. They've infiltrated our communications, our military movements. We cannot predict their next move, and our fleets are scattered and vulnerable." Korlok clenched his fists, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. "I know that," he growled, "but I refuse to surrender. There must be a way to turn the tide. We cannot let this war end with our extinction." Another officer, Kyler, spoke, her voice shaking but resolute. "Sir, there is one option we have not explored. We have the ability to deploy our secret weapon, a weapon that could wipe out their fleet in one fell swoop. But it comes with risks. If we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic, not just for them, but for us as well." Korlok's eyes narrowed. "What are you suggesting, Kalar?" Kalar stepped forward, her face grim. "The Elysium device. It is an experimental weapon capable of devastating entire fleets with a single strike. However, it requires an immense amount of energy, and once deployed, we would have no way of controlling its aftermath. The blast would affect everything within a wide radius, including our own ships." Korlok was silent for a moment, considering her words. The Elysium device was something the Drathar had kept hidden for years, an ultimate weapon designed to ensure their dominance over the galaxy. But using it now, when their fleet was already on the brink of collapse, would be a gamble. If it failed, if the humans anticipated it and neutralized it, the Drathar might not survive. But Korlok knew that this might be their only option. He had no choice. The Empire was crumbling, and if there was even a slim chance that the Elysium device could give them the edge, they had to take it. "Prepare the device," Korlok ordered, his voice cold and decisive. "We will not go quietly into the dark. We will make them pay for every ship they've destroyed." As his officers scrambled to implement the plan, Korlok stood alone in the command center, staring out at the stars. The humans had pushed them to the edge, but he wasn't ready to let them win. Not yet. He would use everything at his disposal to protect the Drathar Empire, even if it meant sacrificing everything. In the darkness of space, the human fleet continued its relentless assault, unaware of the deadly weapon that now lay in wait. The Drathar had one last card to play, and Korlok was determined to make sure that it was the last thing the humans ever saw. The Elysium device was ready. In the deepest chamber of Korlok's flagship, technicians scrambled to prepare the ultimate weapon. The energy required to activate the device was immense, and every Drathar ship in the fleet was now linked together to funnel their remaining power into the device. The room hummed with the intense energy being harnessed, and the air crackled with anticipation. This was their last hope. If this failed, the Drathar Empire would fall. There would be no recovery. Korlok stood at the command center, his fingers tight against the armrest of his throne-like seat, his mind racing. The human fleet was circling them, like predators closing in on their prey. They had no idea what was coming. They were confident in their victory so far, but the Drathar were about to deliver a blow that could alter the course of the war in an instant. "Activate the device. Now," Korlok commanded, his voice cold with determination. The room went quiet for a moment, then the screens around him flickered to life as the technicians initiated the final countdown. Korlok's heart beat in sync with the ticking of the clock. His entire empire rested on this single moment. The Elysium device was their last chance. He knew the risks. The blast would not only devastate the human fleet but also threaten to cripple his own. The energy required to harness the weapon was beyond what even the Drathar could safely control. If they miscalculated, if the weapon backfired, they could all perish in the ensuing explosion. There was no turning back now. As the countdown reached its final seconds, Korlok's gaze shifted to the view screen, where the human ships, still clustered in their tight, coordinated formations, remained blissfully unaware of the impending disaster. They had underestimated the Drathar once, but this time, the tables would turn. The final seconds ticked by, and with a sharp command, Korlok ordered, "Release the charge." In an instant, the room shuddered as the device activated. A brilliant flash of light enveloped the entire flagship, sending waves of energy rippling outward. The immense power surged through the fleet, causing the Drathar ships to tremble. The weapon's signature energy pulse extended outward, a blinding shockwave that surged toward the human armada. Korlok watched with bated breath, expecting the human fleet to disintegrate in a massive explosion. But as the blast spread, something strange happened. Instead of an immediate devastation, the humans seemed to anticipate it. Their ships, as if guided by an unseen hand, veered off course at the exact moment the shockwave struck. They moved with precision, each ship dodging the blast by mere fractions of a second. Some ships shimmered and vanished into what appeared to be short-range warp jumps, while others deployed advanced countermeasures to absorb the blast's energy. The Elysium device, for all its might, had failed to land a decisive blow. Korlok's stomach dropped. The humans had predicted the attack. They had known exactly what was coming. And worse yet, they had countered it with technology the Drathar could not comprehend. The human fleet was now closing in even faster, their ships weaving in and out of their own blast radius with an ease that defied logic. How could they have known? Korlok muttered, the shock of the situation gripping him. The humans had studied them. No, they had mastered the Drathar's weaknesses. Every attempt to crush them had been anticipated. Every countermeasure, every weapon, every maneuver had been met with the same cold precision. The Drathar were not just fighting an enemy. They were fighting an intelligence that could outthink them at every turn. "Sir," an officer interrupted his thoughts, "the humans are preparing to launch a counterattack. They've adapted to the blast. They're moving in." The air in the command room was thick with tension. Korlok's hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. The fleet was reeling from the failed strike, and the humans were closing in, preparing to deliver their final blow. The Drathar were on the verge of defeat, not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked something even more crucial: the ability to understand their opponent. The humans were no longer just a foe. They were a force of nature. Korlok stood, his heart filled with a cold, terrible clarity. "Prepare to retreat," he ordered, his voice betraying the grim realization settling over him. "We have nothing left to lose." But as the orders were given and the Drathar fleet began to pull back, Korlok knew the humans had already won. The battle might not be over, but the Drathar Empire had been undone. Not by superior firepower, but by the one thing they could never understand: the relentless adaptability of humanity. And with that, Korlok realized that the true cost of underestimating humanity wasn't just a lost battle, it was the loss of an entire empire's future. The Drathar fleet, broken and demoralized, drifted helplessly in the cold expanse of space. Their once proud ships, now battered and scarred from the relentless conflict, were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. Korlok's command had faltered, and the Elysium device, once their greatest weapon, had failed to achieve the victory they so desperately needed. The humans, with their unmatched resolve and adaptability, had once again outmaneuvered the Drathar. As the Drathar forces began to retreat, it became painfully clear to Korlok that the war was lost. His empire, forged through countless conquests, was crumbling. He had miscalculated every step, assuming that raw power and fear would subdue the humans. But it wasn't power that had driven them forward. It was something far deeper. It was their unyielding spirit, their unity, their refusal to be cowed by anyone, even the mightiest of empires. Korlok stood on the bridge of his flightship, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars that had once felt like a symbol of Drathar dominion now felt distant and cold. He could no longer see them as symbols of conquest, but reminders of his failures. It was in the silence of space that he realized how much he had underestimated the humans. They had not only fought for survival, they had fought for something greater, something that would outlast any empire, any weapon, any force. The human fleet, though still smaller in numbers, had managed to cut down the Drathar's superiority through sheer ingenuity and determination. They had refused to give in, to break, to lose. And now, as Korlok watched his own ships retreat, he felt the crushing weight of their victory. The humans had not only bested them, they had fundamentally changed the nature of this conflict. The Drathar would never be the same again. "We have lost," Korlok said, his voice barely a whisper. His eyes scanned the remnants of his fleet, and the officers around him could only nod solemnly. There was no escaping the truth. The Drathar Empire, for all its might, had been undone not by a superior force but by an indomitable will. Humanity had shown that no matter the odds, they would fight back, they would adapt, and they would win. Across the battlefield, the humans were moving in for the final push. Their ships, small but nimble, closed in on the retreating Drathar, their weapons poised to finish what had been started. But even now, the humans held no arrogance. There was no gloating, no excessive celebration. They simply did what they had to do, ensure the Drathar could never again threaten the peace they had fought so hard to protect. As the first human vessels entered the Drathar's retreat zone, a transmission crackled through the communication line. Korluk, expecting more threats or demands, was surprised when he heard a calm, composed voice on the other end. "This battle is over," the human commander said. "Your fleet is defeated. Your empire is broken. But we offer you a choice. We can end this here, with dignity, or you can continue this fight and see what little remains of your empire obliterated. The decision is yours." Korluk's heart sank. He had expected the humans to crush them without mercy, but instead they were offering a chance at survival. It was a recognition of the Drathar's strength, a strange kind of respect, born from a deep understanding of the consequences of war. The humans, though victorious, showed no desire to annihilate the Drathar completely. They were showing mercy, a mercy that Korluk could never have anticipated. With a heavy heart, Korluk made his decision. "We accept your terms," he said, his voice strained. "We will cease the conflict. The Drathar Empire surrenders." The transmission ended, and the human fleet began to pull back. The Drathar were spared, their empire broken but allowed to survive. And as the last remnants of the Drathar fleet limped into the darkness, Korluk knew that the galaxy had forever changed. The humans, once thought weak and insignificant, had proven their resilience, their strength, and their unity. They had not only defeated an empire, they had secured their place as the dominant force in the galaxy. And as Korluk watched them disappear into the stars, he realized that the legacy of humanity had just begun. It wasn't just the humans' victory that would be remembered. It was the way they had changed the galaxy itself, reminding every species that no matter how strong or powerful you were, it was the spirit of the people that determined the outcome of every battle. And that, Korluk thought, as he watched the fading light of the human fleet, would be their true legacy.